Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Seeking Excellence podcast. This is your boy, Nathan Crankfield. And today I'm really excited for today's episode. I'm so excited to share this with you. This is an awesome conversation that I just had with Dr. Anthony Isacco from the University of St. Mary's in Minnesota. St. Mary's University of Minnesota. I should say that properly and correctly. But Dr. Anthony Isacco was absolutely an awesome guest. He crushes it and answers almost all of my most pressing questions about psychology, about mental health, and all of these different things that, I have some hot takes on, I think, within a lot of the mental health professional circles, talking about, I think that the mental health profession has overstepped and overreached in certain ways. I think that when it's divorced from the spiritual life and the reality that we're mind, body, and soul, that I think it can get kind of toxic. And I think there's a lot of issues there. And so we wrestle with that. We talk about those questions that I have. We talk about whether or not Gen Z and millennials are a softer generation, if we're too much into mental health and just not gritty enough, or if the older, the boomers are just too anti-mental health. We talk about how we can go from knowing the right thing to do. A lot of times in our lives, we know the right thing to do, whether it's fitness, reading, prayer, but we don't do it. And there's some things that we know we shouldn't do, especially the things that are going to impact our mental health, but we still do them anyways. And so how do we actually start to break that and start to build momentum in the right direction in our lives and end the momentum in things that are actually leading to our mediocrity and destroying our excellent life? And so super blessed that he decided to join me today. He was previously at Franciscan University, and a couple other universities, talking or teaching forming future mental health professionals. And now he's running this clinical psychology program at St. Mary's University of Minnesota, which we're going to talk about today as well, and how they're going about forming the next generations of counselors and therapists from the Catholic perspective. And so how do you actually take the Catholic faith as the foundation for mental health and the mental health profession? And so they're launching their first cohort in that program this fall, which is really exciting. And so if you're interested, or you know somebody who's interested in mental health beyond just the hobby or just knowing about your own personal mental health, but actually seeking maybe a master's degree in clinical psychology, this is the program to go to. It's unique. I think it's one of a kind. And if you love Dr. Isacco, you're going to love the program, because he was the one of the primary brains behind it and is running the program there. And so he's somebody that I would definitely encourage, if my son or friend was looking to go into this more deeply, he would be the person I'd love to entrust them to for their formation. And so check that out. Thank you for listening today. As always, it's great to be with you. This episode's available on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. If you can like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. It's a free thing that you can do for the show that goes a long way and helps us to reach a broader audience and to spread the message of personal excellence to many, many more people. So thank you for tuning in today. I hope that you enjoy this episode and get as much out of it as I did. So without further ado, let's get to the episode today with Dr. Anthony Isacco. Dr. Anthony Isacco, it is so great to be with you. I told you when we first started talking that I've said your name, hundreds, if not thousands of times, going through the Hallow app with different teachers, educators, pastors, and showing our mental health section. And so it's an honor and privilege to get to speak with you today. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on your podcast. Really appreciate it. I like to joke that I'm kind of like the Forrest Gump of Catholic psychologists. Like, people are like, how did you get on the Hallow app? Like, that's so cool. Like, my cool factor went way up. And I was like, I don't know. I just kind of like stumbled into it. I got asked and did it. And I'm glad it has been some benefit to some people over the years.
For sure. That's awesome. Yeah, it's been very good. I've always enjoyed it and appreciate your work and continue to work and advance Catholic psychology, and excited to learn more about kind of just approach to mental health and all of that in general. But first, would love to do just kind of a brief introduction, kind of your background, your story, especially just kind of a quick overview of your kind of faith journey, where you're at today, what you're doing for work, and all that kind of fun stuff.
Okay, sure. So currently, I'm the program director at St. Mary's University of Minnesota in our new online clinical psychology program that is Catholic faith integrated. Previous to that, I worked 16 years as a professor and administrator at Chatham University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Outside of work, my primary vocation is a husband and father. So, been married to my wife Celeste for 21 years, and we have four beautiful, active, you know, give me a hard time daughters. They're ages
Nice.
17, 16, 13, and 10. So yeah, three of the four are teenagers. And so yeah, proud father, proud husband, and cradle Catholic. So really, just a big part of my vocation and identity is based in the Catholic faith. And so much of what I've tried to do in my professional life is to integrate who I am as a Catholic and, the truths of our faith with, who I am as a psychologist and the work that I do in that space.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love to hear it, and I'm excited to hear about the program and just kind of like I said, your general approach to psychology because I think that I always say I don't really have like a hot take. And sometimes I feel like I come off anti-psychology or anti-mental health, but I think that I always have like a cautious optimism when it comes to the mental health profession. I've benefited from it myself, from counseling and therapy from the time that I was 10, 11, 12 years old. My wife and I have gone to marriage counseling before to get ahead of problems. I always tell people, I'm like, if you're having the same argument over and over again, it's time to bring in a third party, right? There's no point in just continuously having the same fight for 30 years of your lives. Like, just get somebody that can kind of hear you guys out, see where there's some blind spots, all that sort of thing. And so, like, I'm very pro um, people attending therapy, counseling, and I think that it has its place in the world. Where I think that, and I'm curious to know your thoughts of this from the broader perspective before we kind of get into the details. Is I think the industry has gone astray in certain ways. Of kind of overdiagnosing certain things, of being very quick, especially to diagnose with medicine and getting medication involved very early ages and very early in diagnoses. I think processes and things like that. Now you know much more about that than I do, but that's where I think sometimes it has kind of stepped outside of its lane, and especially I think it's saddest when that is detached from the spiritual reality that we operate in,
Mhm, mhm.
detached from faith, right? Where it's just treating the human person as though living a life of utter sin and self-indulgence and um, self-focus is not going to lead you to being depressed and anxious and having mental health issues, right? Not realizing there's also a connection between those things. So curious, just yeah, general reactions to that. Do you think I'm totally off base? Do you think that there's some truth to what I said, or what's kind of your perspective on kind of mental health as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've been studying psychology since I was 18 years old. So that's a long time. And one of the reasons why I've studied this long is it's just super interesting. I mean, the science of psychology can be so sound and can be such a gift to understanding the world and people. And so psychology does have like a lot to offer. And so it's one of the reasons why I've remained a psychologist and teach psychology and train students to do this work. I mean, there is just a lot of good in psychology. And then I would agree with you. There's times when psychology has gone astray or has just chosen to have like huge blind spots. And those blind spots have typically been in the faith, religion, and spirituality domain. And that's pretty much what we're trying to do in our new program is take the best of the science and practice of psychology and then bring that together with the truths and the beauty and the wisdom of the Catholic faith. So we can have the best of both worlds, so to speak, in our work with people.
Absolutely. What do you think is the balance between faith and mental health? Because, like I said, I actually this is a good story for you. You'll appreciate this. I got some flack from a student at a talk that I gave back in June. Now, to be fair, she misheard me on what I said about stress, anxiety, and prayer.
Hmm.
But I'll say what I said, and then I'll say what she thought I said. So what I said was that if you do not pray, similar to what I said before about, I think if you do not pray and you live a life of consistent mortal sin, that you're going to have much more stress, anxiety, depression, sadness in your life than if you did the opposite, right? That if you were pursuing a life of God, if you were praying regularly, doesn't mean that my take on that is that it doesn't mean that you can pray all of your anxiety, stress, depression away, but that if you do not, and this is just my personal, my personal experiences. My conversion story is living a life of, pursuing pleasure, selfishness, lying to people, using people, to living a life of Christ. Different worlds, right? When it came to my mental health during those two times. But what she heard me say was that you can just pray all of your anxiety away. If you have
Mm-hmm.
anxiety and depression, it's because you're not praying. Now, there
Mm-hmm.
are people, I think, in the world that believe both of those things, right? That believe that you can pray your anxiety away, and people that believe on the other extreme that prayer and faith have nothing to do with your anxiety or depression or things like that. Where do you think the kind of sweet spot is, or the truth lies in balancing the two?
Yeah, great question. And I'm going to go back to my freshman year philosophy class where we studied Aristotle. The virtue is the mean in between two extremes, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that's generally true in response to your question. I've seen people who have been all psychology and like no faith or religion or spirituality, and they kind of miss out on all the good that comes from that. And then I've seen people on the other side of the extreme who have kind of been all faith, and no attention to kind of their psychological, emotional, or social health and well-being. And
Mm-hmm.
then they miss out on the goods of all of that. Have tried to pray away every problem or concern that they've had. And that's not healthy either. And I think there's a lot of room in the middle for that virtue, for that balance, where you want to bring in the best of psychology and the best of our faith to get that virtuous flourishing and thriving. And I think a lot of that perspective is really just based in our understanding of the human person from our Catholic faith. Like we are a unified person of body, soul, mind, and spirit. And so if something's off in our body, it's gonna, something's gonna be off in our spirit and our mind and so on, and so you need that unity and that integration between all of these parts of who we are because that's how we were created.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And pointing to that there, that you're trying to find that virtue in the middle. Where do you think people can kind of give themselves, or how can we kind of develop a framework for when we know we need to go pursue a mental health professional in our lives? So, like, I gave the example earlier of in marriage, if you're having the same fight, over and over again for a year plus, 6 months plus to a year plus, and it's causing a lot of friction in your marriage, like, just whether that's a spiritual director, a friend, a counselor, find somebody who can at least help you to kind of navigate that, so you can have the tools and things you need to get through that. As an individual, how do I kind of know the balance? Because I don't think it's every time I get sad I need to schedule an appointment with my therapist necessarily, but there is a point at which obviously I should pursue that, or seek that out, right? So how do you
Mhm.
kind of navigate finding that time, or what would you encourage just individuals out there
Yeah, there's
to
kind of
do?
a couple indicators that are pretty common that anybody can kind of look for or see or pick up on. One is like similar to what you were just talking about. If you're like spinning your wheels, you're having the same struggle, the same conflict, the same fight over and over again, and you haven't sought help. One of the things I like to ask people is like, how do you like that? How do you like that feeling of like Groundhog Day? Do you want to keep, spinning your wheels and keep on
Yes.
that treadmill, so to speak, or there could be a path off that where you actually move forward. Another kind of indicator is if like a good friend or family member says, "Hey, like you're off, like something's off with you right now. You don't seem yourself. Do you want to talk about something concerning?" Sometimes when we have a difficulty, we get so caught up in ourselves, we turn inward, and we lose kind of a self perspective that someone else can pick up on. And then a lot of what I see among practicing Catholics is kind of what I call the car wash routine. They think they can go to confession and maybe confess their way out of their mental health problem, and so they'll be
Yeah.
going to confession up to like sometimes 4 or 5 times a month. And I love the sacrament of confession. I go to confession myself, but it's not the psychological cure all that some people think it is. And so I will often encourage someone to be like, okay, why don't you just pause confession for a little bit because it seems like your problem is a little bit different than just kind of the moral, development of your soul right now, but maybe something more psychological that goes kind of in tandem with that.
Yeah. And that kind of hits on, I'm sure a lot of that, if you think about things that are most common, especially for young men, things like pornography addiction or things of that nature that are going to be, yeah, something that might have a mental health component to it. Obviously, any addiction is going to have a mental health component to it, but we do want to kind of just pray it away or just kind of go to confession, try to grit our way through it. And obviously, that hits on some of the work that you've done with Hallow, and obviously a lot of your work, I'd imagine, over the years. So, tell me a little bit more about that. What would be kind of what is kind of some of the driver behind addiction and some of the things that are going to obviously greatly impact our spiritual lives, but have this psychological component to it that sometimes we might over spiritualize.
Yeah. Pornography is a really good example, unfortunately, of some of the things that we're talking about here. And I work a lot with young men, particularly young men who are really, really well intentioned. They're really trying to live a virtuous, faith filled life. And I admire just their perseverance and their resilience to kind of keep at it and keep striving for that virtue in their life. And pornography can really be like that proverbial thorn in their side. Usually, pornography or an addiction is just a mask or surface symptom of an underlying problem, emotion, some kind of negative emotion. Feeling depressed, feeling anxious, feeling unheard, unaffirmed in their life, wanting to escape their present reality. And so they deal with that unpleasant emotion through escapism and avoidance. And what better escape or avoidance behavior than pornography right now? And so, a lot of the work that I try to do with young men around addiction or pornography consumption is you got to approach. You can't avoid forever. I mean, you could, but isn't healthy for you. So you have to approach the negative emotion. You have to deal with reality. One of my favorite sayings is, in order to deal with reality, you first need to define reality. And so this emotion of yours, this struggle, here's how we define it. And then we can deal with it directly. And so that's kind of a general kind of approach that I take with young men. And there's lots of science out there now. I would credit psychology for picking up at science on the treatment of pornography over the last 5 or 10 years. Some of the problems I've experienced is that men have sought help from a secular counselor around this issue and have been told, "Well, it's normal, it's fine. Like that's not that big of a problem. Don't worry about it." And so young men have come to me seeking that faith integration, where they get a treatment approach that's aligned with their beliefs around this particular issue.
Right. Yeah, I think the avoidance piece is obviously really big and something that men are often attributed with, right? That
Yes.
seems to be a big issue of just kind of avoiding problems, wanting to push them under the rug. I think a it kind of reminded me when you were saying that of one of my favorite things I heard Father Mike at a men's conference earlier this year in January in Florida was talking about kind of what he calls the two biggest temptations for men and women, especially within in marriage, but just kind of in general too. I think in their lives, that men's biggest temptation is to become passive, and women's biggest temptation is for control. And so he
Hmm.
kind of talks all the way back to the Garden of Eden, right? Which both of these things happened in the Garden of Eden and set us on the path that we're on still today. And I think that's such an interesting thing to think about within problems that we have, issues that we're facing, emotions, difficulties, feeling unheard or unaffirmed. That men tend to become passive and kind of just avoid and look for ways to kind of distract ourselves through that. What do you think are uh yeah, some of the best ways that we can seek out ways to kind of fulfill, well, one, how do we discover what our need is, right? Is it that I'm lonely? Am I unaffirmed? And am I stressed or depressed or those kinds of things, like how do I kind of discover if I just have this like uneasiness within me, how do I start to discover that? And then how can I actually start to address that and face that problem with courage?
Hmm. Yeah, good question. I'm gonna just go back to the passivity among men piece
Yeah,
for just
please.
for a second, because I know you've on your show talked about manhood and masculinity a lot, and I think it's just still such a relevant current topic, and the kind of the ministry efforts and outreach for men in our culture are still so palpable. Um, but yeah, I mean, going back to our Catholic anthropology on manhood, men aren't meant to be passive, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's like such a temptation and such a problem, because we're doing something that's antithetical to our masculinity when we get into this passivity. um, I was talking to a couple priests who know the scripture a lot better than I do, who gave me like example after example of God calling men to do something. You know,
Sure.
build an ark, lead my people out of the promised land, go build my church. Those are very active directives, you know, and so re- there's like a biblical foundation and biblical evidence for God saying, "Hey, you're a man. You can't be passive. You need to. We need to get you activated, and doing something." That's a very healthy thing for men, and a big expression of our masculinity is whenever we can turn that passivity into activity, and even better whenever it's
Mhm.
directed for the good in the world.
Absolutely.
In terms of like your question on how we can kind of like notice some of these things, well, self knowledge is like a great psychological and theological principle. That's always like the first step in recognizing if something's off, is doing like a check in with ourselves. And self knowledge is a skill. We can't just like wake up and say, well, I'm fully aware and understand myself one day. It's something that we have to practice each and every day. It's a little bit cliche to say these days, but I think it's true. We grow in self knowledge through taking time to be silent and thinking about who we are in the world, and how we're acting in the world. And that's in that silent reflective time, that's usually where we can pick up on not only where we might be off and where we might not be feeling well, but that's also a time where we can pick up on our strengths, where we're doing well in our life, and what are some areas of gratitude we need to express to God as well, which is also really healthy to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the intentional gratitude can be so impactful. Such a simple thing that we can start to do and has just changed lives. I know my wife, we were just talking about her practice of just like a gratitude journal every day. She writes down something she's thankful for generally in her life, for me and for from our kids, experience from the day with the kids. And it's just like radically changed her daily experience of life. It's been really awesome and beautiful to see that.
Oh yeah, gratitude is one of the most positive emotions to cultivate, to express and practice at getting good at as well. It's a skill in and of itself. Um, are you a Saint Ignatius guy by any chance?
I am. Yeah, I'm a pretty big fan. I love the rules for discernment have been a guiding force in my life. And then we, yeah, do some great stuff. On Hallow, we have the Ignatius challenges and things like that, which are really awesome.
Oh, good, good. So a good colleague of mine, friend, his name is Tom Plant. He's a psychologist out at Santa Clara University. He's been doing psychological research on the examen for the last few years. And the examine is a very quick spiritual exercise that cultivates silence, self reflection, gratitude, and then a commitment to like live a better life day in and day out. It can be done in as quick as 5 minutes, or of course, you can extend it out to 10 or 20 minutes, depending on what you're reflecting on. But he's doing like some really good, like empirical research on this in different groups and finding that decreases stress, increases life satisfaction, decreases anxiety. So it's a really good example of how these things go hand in hand, and that we can't compartmentalize our domains of health into different areas. They really are integrated.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of that, that's a good segue into another question I wanted to ask you about, because I think this is especially true for men, but I know that scientifically it's true for men and for women. But what are some of the experiences you've had, and just some of the science behind the impact of our physical health on our mental health? So things like exercise, how much does diet and nutrition impact our mental health, our rest and our sleep? I think these are again things that I think sometimes we don't acknowledge or address. And I think especially the worst of psychology can just go again straight to medicine and pharmaceuticals, when it's like, okay, let's take a little bit of a stock of this person is only surviving on potato chips and soda, and they're sleeping for 4 hours a night after scrolling their phone and playing video games until 1 a.m. That's probably having an impact on some of the stress we're experiencing as well, and our ability to manage it. So how do you kind of to find the balance of those things, and what's the impact on the body, on the mind?
Oh yeah, good question. It made me think of my mom. My mom's a great lady, a wonderful woman, and she never finished high school, let alone went to college, and would often say to me, Anthony, you got your PhD, from school and stuff. I got my PhD from living life. And so much of like your question to me is based on just common sense that my mom taught me and that moms all over the world have taught their children.
Mhm.
You need to eat your vegetables. You need to eat your vegetables and have a good diet because it's good for you. Like you don't need some highfalutin PhD to kind of tell you that, and for us to know that. Same thing with exercise. My mom, my parents, very much valued physical activity. We always played sports, football, basketball, baseball, cross country, golf, hockey, you name it, because we needed to be active. We needed to be exercising, especially boys, but certainly as a father of four girls, I pretty much have the same parenting philosophy with them as well. And so you just, you can observe the goodness from those basics in life: diet, exercise. And then it's really not surprising that the science also speaks to these truths. You know, um, there's some studies out there that find that, um, you know, running 3 days a week has the same impact, if not more, on depressive feelings as the leading antidepressant. Um, and so
Wow.
it's common sense meeting, the psychological sciences. It just kind of further supports, these things that we've known for a long time, but people do need to hear them, and learn about them in different ways nowadays.
Yeah. And that sparked something else in me too, that reminds me of scripture. I believe it's Romans 7, where St. Paul says, I do the things that I hate doing, and I don't do the things that I know I should be doing. And I
Hmm.
think that that is so real to human existence. I'll never forget being in college and reading that and being like, this is me. Like St. Paul and I are, I'm living his life right now of just everything that I know I shouldn't be doing, I'm doing. Everything I know I should be doing, not everything, but a lot of what I know I should be doing, I'm not doing it. And so, what is some of the reasons behind that? Because obviously, yeah, you can witness this. You do see that healthy people generally are happier and they're living more fulfilled lives. But we still have insane obesity rates in the United States. We still are eating a lot of junk. I am fully aware of this stuff, right? My wife is crunchy, self-described crunchy, and very into non-toxic living and those sorts of things, which I think have been really helpful. But both of us still have a sweet tooth. We still go to more desserts than we should, and we work out less than we should. So what is some of the reason behind that? What is some of the mindset, and do you think, like, blockers in our decision making, or issues with our decision making or thinking, that prevent us from just doing some of these simple things that we know we should be doing but aren't doing, and vice versa?
Yeah, whenever I talk to people that I work with in my clinical practice, one of the things I always ask them is, how much are you exercising? And the most common response I get to that question is, well, here's what I'm trying to do. And I say, well, just wait 1 second. I didn't ask you what you're trying to do. I'm asking you what you actually are doing when it comes to exercise. Um, and I think
Yep.
what that little kind of subtle shift in the response tells me is that basically people can just like talk their way out of engaging in things like exercise, eating right for lots of different reasons. It's a little bit of a built-in defense mechanism.
Hmm.
Well, I'm trying to do this, or maybe I'll start tomorrow, or it wasn't so bad today. I know I
Yep.
need to, and then they make a little joke a bit out of it, and kind of lightens the mood around it. But I try to get to like behaviors,
Yep.
like what are you doing,
What's
and
actually
if you're not,
happening?
yeah, what's actually happening, and then we could talk about that, and then we could talk about like how you can get engaged in like the actual behaviors that are healthy, for you to do. I'm a big believer in this concept called like behavioral momentum. I don't know if you've heard of it before.
Mm-mm.
So behavioral momentum is basically like once you start doing something positive, like you're trained for a marathon, so you start running, every day or 4 days a week, then you have like momentum towards like this good set of behaviors, these healthy set of behaviors. It starts to take on a little bit of energy and force of its own. You then wake up and you want to do the running instead of like forcing yourself or gritting and bear it. But behavioral momentum could also work in the opposite direction, right? If you start engaging in a lot of negative behaviors, unhealthy behaviors, then that can create its own momentum. And you just kind of
Right.
keep slipping more and more in that unhealthy direction.
The downward spiral.
Correct. Yep, exactly.
Yeah,
So
that
I'm a
totally
big
makes
momentum
sense.
guy. I'm a big momentum guy, and I try to check my momentum, and then I try to check that with the people that I'm working with as well too.
Yeah, that's super important. I love the digging deeper into what are you actually doing, not what do you want to do. It reminded me of this story when I had a friend who was a seminarian at the time, and the Monsignor, who was director of the seminary, needed to lose weight. He was pretty overweight, and he was going to his doctor, and the doctor's like, Monsignor, seriously, you have to lose weight. Like, you need to start exercising. And so he comes back next time. And he's like, have you been exercising? Yes. And they do that basically monthly. And he's like, a few, 3 or 4 months in, he's like, you haven't lost any weight. Have you actually been exercising? He says, yes, I have. And he finally says, well, what have you been doing? And he says, well, a few times a week, I do 5 push-ups and 5 sit-ups, and I walk around the building. And he's like, that is not exercise. Like, that is not qualify for what you need to be doing to lose, 80 pounds or whatever he needed to drop. So that's always important, I think, to dig deep into. Like, everybody has this idea of what we're shooting for when it comes to fitness or nutrition, and what are you actually doing? What's actually getting done week to week is really important. And it's just interesting thinking about that. Even just the people that I've known, whether it's online or people I've gone to in person, or just like researching therapists or counselors, you don't see a lot of overweight counselors. It's kind of like doctors, right? Like, you just don't see medical doctors as well. Like, you don't see a lot of people that are overweight in those fields. And I think the reason is often because you recognize the relationship between those things, right? You know the deeply the importance of them, and it's not that they don't exist, obviously, but it's pretty rare to find somebody who's substantially overweight that's a therapist or things like that.
Well, yeah, that's a good observation. And I know just from my own personal point of view, like I try to be like a good role model to the people I work with, like I
Right.
try to walk the talk, with them, because there would be quite an incongruence if I'm trying to work with someone around some of these kind of concerns and difficulties, and they look at me and are kind of like, well, what about you?
Right.
That none of this seems to be working for you. So, I don't go too extreme in terms of like self-disclosure with the patients I work with, but I do try to set a certain tone of, all right, well, I'm working on these things as well, or I have worked on them. I want to show you that I have walked the walk here, not just talking the talk.
Sure. Absolutely. No, it totally makes sense. One question I had for you, kind of going along with that, and this concept of men, is a lot of times we get exceptionally harder. I think there's a lot of tension between generations right now. Where you have like the boomer to millennial tension that I think can exist as millennials are trying to buy homes, and boomers are telling them, just kind of you got to work harder and save your money and stop spending money on Starbucks and all those sorts of things that are happening on the financial front. But there's also a big divide, I think, and kind of tension between just mindset, right? The millennials or Gen Z often get viewed as kind of the weakest generation we've ever had, and they're seen as this generation that doesn't have the mental toughness and the grit that existed before. Now, part of me thinks that that's true, that there is a weakness that has kind of come about from just the I think prosperity. I think prosperity kind of breeds a certain weakness because you do have, you look at a lot of the issues or things, especially I think that a lot of the stuff the mental health profession is addressing, especially with like gender dysphoria or some of those issues that kind of have really come alive in the last 10, 15, 20 years in a major way, right? Have surged and seen a lot of momentum behind them that you don't see as much, right? Like in World War II, in the middle of France, like there wasn't a huge uprising of transgenderism, right? Like in war-torn Somalia, like they're not worried about these things. It's not what's on the ballot, right? Or top of mind for people who are wondering where their next meal is going to come from. Typically, is microaggressions aren't a common complaint in Ukraine or in Russia right now, right? But what do you think is kind of the balance of that? You've obviously been in the industry and studying this stuff for a long time. Do you think there's some truth behind our generation and millennials, Gen Zs are kind of weaker? How can we kind of curtail that if it is true? And or do you think that it's a good thing and we're just kind of having this openness to mental health and wanting to, have kind of a more self-care approach, if you will?
Yeah,
That's a
love
good thing.
love love the question. My wife and I joke all the time about generational differences. It's always like a good dinner time conversation.
Yeah.
I'm 45, and so I'm technically in Gen X. And
Yes.
I call Gen X like the Switzerland of generations. Like we're not at war with
That's
anybody.
right.
Like everything was like
Got no
good pretty
beef.
much
Yeah.
growing up. No beef, we don't get
Yeah.
called into these kind of conflicts and debates at all. Like we're generally seen as like just like good citizens doing good work.
That's so
Um
funny.
yeah, and my wife was born in 1981, so 1 year younger than me, and that's technically like the fault line to be a millennial. So I'll often joke with her that
Wow.
she's a millennial and I'm the Gen X, and so we have to really reconcile these generational differences between us all the time. But there's
That's
I
incredible.
think going back a little bit to what you said earlier in our conversation about like some of the ways mental health and psychology has gone askew. I think that is one of the ways in some of these generational debates, because the boomers, my parents, your parents probably, like if you would have brought up the idea of going to see a counselor to them in their life for
Mhm.
mental health concern. I mean, talk about like you're nodding your head right now, so I'm assuming
Yep.
you're in agreement with what I'm
I've
about
seen
to just
this.
say. Yeah, like
Yep.
that. I mean, talk about
Unthinkable to
a
some.
conversation stopper right there, like
Yep.
full stop. That's not going to happen. Never going to happen. Worst idea in the world. And so there was a lot of stigma in that generation around mental health, a lot of lack of help seeking. And then you have that kind of out on an extreme.
Mhm.
The advantage to that is a lot of those, a lot of people in that generation learn to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and live their life and grit and bear things, right?
Sure.
The disadvantage is that doesn't always work. That can lead to more hardship.
Yep.
And that cycle that we were kind of talking about, you have the same fight over and over again, the same issue coming up over and over again. Millennials have grown up in this context where, yeah, mental health was way destigmatized. And that's a pretty good thing, like we want, as a mental health professional, I want my services not to have this kind of cloud of stigma around it. But then it got to the point where, as you were kind of talking about earlier, every maybe possible feeling is then pathologized. um,
Right.
I was talking to a young man some time ago who was telling me about how he felt so lonely. And I started to unpack that feeling a little bit more with him, asking him some questions. And we got to the point where I was like, all right, so tell me, like, when do you feel lonely? He's like, well, whenever I'm alone. I'm like, all right, well, what's happening when you're alone? I'm like, well, I'm in my house by myself. And I'm like, okay, so you feel lonely when you're in your house by yourself. And he's like, yes. And I'm like, all right, do you hear that out loud? I was like, do you think that's a little bit of a normal reaction to being in your
Right.
home by yourself? And he's like, wow, I guess you're right. Maybe it's just, I go, does that, now when you're out of your house with other people, do you feel lonely? He goes, no, I don't. I go, okay. So when you're with people, you feel connected and that you belong. When you're alone, you feel lonely. Well, you're living life. That's
Right.
you're being human. And so for
Yeah.
millennials, they
We've
need that
overdone it.
permission. They need that permission to live life, to be human, to experience the range of emotion without the pathologizing of that range of emotions.
Yes. That's where I think some of the, participation trophy, self-esteem generation that I grew up in, sometimes you have that experience where it's like, no, you're not supposed to have any negative experiences of life. And you're not supposed to experience negative emotions. If you do something's wrong, then you need to seek help. And yeah, that obviously was kind of this correction that I think was, to your point from earlier, and Aristotle's point from thousands of years ago. We got to find the virtuous middle, right? We
Right.
shouldn't be like, no, you should never seek help, but also like every time, that's so funny. I feel lonely when I'm alone. That's powerful, man. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
When do you feel anxious? Well, before a test. Well, of
yeah,
course,
right.
when
That's
do you
gonna happen,
feel, yeah, when do you feel depressed? When something bad happened? Of course, we have
right?
to give ourselves permission again to feel negative emotions that are natural and normal and just part of life and part of being human.
Right. Yeah, 100%. That's incredible. That kind of goes along with another question that I had for you is sometimes I think within that, and kind of this shift in destigmatization of mental health, you have, I think, this debate that sometimes my wife and I talk about a lot, and I've talked about it with friends before of is therapy or counseling, and I'd be interested to know kind of your delineation between the two, but are they something that is meant for the vast majority of people to be indefinite? Or do you think there should be kind of like an aim of like a graduation from it that turns into like a tune up and check in, but not like a weekly or bi-weekly something? Now that's gonna, I know, vary. You're gonna have extreme cases. If somebody's schizophrenic, then maybe they do have, mental health services for the rest of their life, right? Somebody who's going through severe chronic anxiety or depression, like serious chemical imbalances, those sorts of things, right? Serious suicidal thoughts. Like, I know there's going to be extreme cases for this, but I think generally, I'm somebody that I experience anxiety, depression from time to time, but not in a serious or crippling sort of way. Um, my wife and I, if we're going to counseling together, like, is that something that we should seek to have? Yeah, weekly, monthly, bi-monthly, whatever it is, kind of indefinitely, or what is kind of your approach to that, especially as you're kind of forming the therapist of the next generation?
Yeah, exactly. There are people more in the kind of far end of the spectrum there who are chronically mentally ill, serious mental illness. They're likely going to need some kind of lifelong support and resource service for their condition. So, by and large, for kind of everybody, like in the middle on average, I totally agree with you in that, counseling is basically supposed to be situational, time limited, and problem focused and goal oriented. And so it feels good to kind of graduate from counseling whenever the goals have been met. And at the same time, that doesn't mean you can't ever, never go back again.
Mm-hmm.
Life throws the proverbial curveballs at us all the time. And so I've had lots of people, start with me, work with me for a few months, graduate, and then 3 years later, God had something else in store for them that was challenging, and then they come back and we do a few more months at that point, for the new challenges and the new goals that they have.
Right.
Um, but yeah, it's not supposed to be, by and large, it's not supposed to be like this indefinite kind of pacifier experience where
Yeah.
you just kind of keep going week after week. It should have some clearly defined goals. You're working towards something constructively. You know, you and the counselor should be on the same page in terms of what the goals are and what it will look like once you accomplish those goals. And then once that has happened, it's like, all right, let's start to plan to wrap up and have a good positive ending.
Right. Yeah, I think that has to be a challenge for I get why therapists can sometimes skew that a little bit, right? Because it is a business, right? It is a source for many people, the primary source of income is their full-time profession. And so I would imagine it has to be tempting, especially if you feel like you're lighter on clients, right? Like, how do I get this person to come back? And I think that especially those who are not faith driven can kind of see it that way, right? Of I want to keep this person coming back, or they feel more desperate. They don't have the trust in providence and believe that God has put them in this vocation when you lack all of that. Or even just obviously we're human beings and it's easy to be money driven, right? And to want to kind
Hmm.
of have people on retainer and retention. How have you or how do you coach people to or train, therapists to balance that and to avoid um wanting to be more self-fulfilling than worrying about the needs of the client?
Yeah, there can be like a little bit of an inherent conflict between the business side of our work and then the human service part, but the human service part should always win out. Like ethically, professionally, we should always be geared towards the good of the other person and putting the business side secondary. What I tell my patients that I work with and how I train my students is the very first session, something to tell a patient is, I'm glad you came to seek help with me. I want to help you. And my goal for you is for you to not to need me anymore at a certain point.
Yes.
um, and that sets the expectation that they're expected to grow and they're expected to grow and heal beyond the need to come to see me, in the
Hmm.
future. That there is going to be like a stop to this, and it's going to a stop because something positive has happened. They've grown and developed and healed in a healthy, good way. That they'll want to stop working with me too.
Right.
um, and for the students I work with, that's usually like, oh wow, that's a good point. I guess I never really considered that. Yeah, there should be an ending to the work that we do
Right.
with our clients. So I talk a lot about how to terminate well with clients. There's a lot of good training that goes into saying goodbye in a healthy way with the people that we work with.
I would imagine without trying to overreach with this analogy, it's got to be somewhat similar to parenting. So I think a lot of parents kind of have that same experience, right? I think you have the also kind of forming and impacting a lot of this generational stuff that we're talking about is some of the helicopter parenting, helicopter moms, dads that want to kind of keep their kids small forever, want them to be kind of fragile, don't want them to grow up, and I think a lot of times can be driven by this selfish desire to want to be needed at the
Mm,
level that they're kind of needed now, when their kids are little, right? And so we're
hmm.
in that stage right now. We have a 2.5 year old, a 5 month old, and it's great. Like Jordan, my son, he needs me to do everything for him. Like he wants me to his help with so many little things, and that can feel nice, and it feels good to be needed, just like it feels nice to be needed and relevant, and important at work, and just kind of in your friends' lives, right? Like we all have this desire for purpose, but it's kind of the
Hmm.
greatest purpose, the most fulfilling purpose you get. I think generally speaking is going to come from your children, and so a lot of times we kind of want to keep them in that space, but actually having the virtue, I think, and the discipline to kind of put that aside for the needs of the other person and allowing them to grow and flourish and have that goal to say, obviously our kids are always going to need us. It changes greatly over the years of what that looks like. But the goal is for you to graduate and to go out and be able to thrive on your own, right? And not need to live in my house and need my funds and need to tie your shoes and to schedule your oil change and all of those things. Like eventually you grow up and you do those things for yourself, and you're a self-sufficient adult that needs me for love and guidance and friendship, but not for making your dinner and doing your laundry, right?
Yeah. That's such a good insight, and it's something that we talk to our students about. Like, what are those personal factors that are driving your professional work? And most of the time, we think of those personal factors as like, the desire to want to help people, to be altruistic, to be of service, and those are good things. But then you can stray into some negative things that can be detrimental to doing good, kind of therapeutic work. Like, as you were kind of articulating there, if that need to be wanted and need to be needed, it becomes so palpable that it kind of keeps, good boundaries from being formed in the therapeutic relationship, or if it keeps the work going past its natural stop point. um, Going back to self knowledge, you need to be aware of that. You need to be able to be reflective on who you are and how you're operating in relation to other people, and then take the steps necessary to kind of work through that yourself as the counselor, which will only be a benefit to the patients that you're working with.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's huge. Tell me a little bit more about the program. So tell me a little bit about what makes it unique, and especially, like, say I'm a young person, I'm thinking about going into the mental health profession, like, what specifically about what you're doing is special, and how did you kinda go about constructing it?
Sure. Thanks for asking. So it's a brand new Master's of Science in Clinical Psychology program at St. Mary's University of Minnesota. The whole curriculum was based on the Catholic kind of teaching of faith and science. And so that's one of the kind of defining unique features of it. So we've taken kind of the best of the science and practice of psychology and the accreditation standards in the field and have built the curriculum on that pillar. And then we've taken the best of Catholic theology and faith and human anthropology and built the curriculum on that pillar as well too. And so we believe that kind of putting both those together will really provide the best training for our students and ultimately like the best care for the people that they work with. And so the program is set to launch this fall with our first cohort of 15 students, which I'm really excited about. And the 95% of the program's online through synchronous and asynchronous
Mhm.
courses. And then the other 5% is we have these 2 residency experiences for our students where we bring them to campus in Minnesota. We have some keynote speakers come in and talk with them. We do some education. We do some program orientation, but mainly we're doing community building, letting people know who their teachers are, who their peers are, so they can build good relationships and bonds that will last them through their time in the program. So, as far as I know, in all my kind of study of graduate programs out there, this is the only program like it out there in the country right now in terms of what we're trying
Yeah,
to do, and I think it's going to be a really good service to the church and a really good program for Catholic students, but we've also gotten a lot of interest from non Catholic students, just students who are interested in going deeper in their clinical work, who understand the importance of faith, religion, and spirituality, and want to integrate that into their professional identity as well. So we have some
interesting.
Christian students, some Muslim students, just some non practicing spiritual students as well, too. And so I think it's going to create like a really nice, robust set of conversations this coming semester.
For sure. Yeah, that sounds like it'll be dynamic without a doubt. That's
Yes.
very cool. And so if people have questions about the program, what's the best place? Is there a website or a form or email, or what would be the best way to learn more about it?
They can email me directly, which is Isacco, Isacco, at smumn.edu. I'm the program director and I answer questions all the time from prospective students. We do have a website on the St. Mary's of Minnesota website, which goes through, more of the classes, curriculum, plan of study, all that kind of stuff. So they can go to the website and check it out. But I love talking to prospective students about the program. So whenever I give you my email address, I really mean it. Shoot me an email. I will read it and respond to it, and we can go from there.
Awesome. I absolutely love it. Well, thank you again for your time today. It was so great to get to hear from you, pick your brain on the topic of mental health. It's something that's super important for living a life of excellence, is having your mindset right, making sure that you're treating your mind the way that you should, recognizing that you're going to need help from other people, whether that's friends, spiritual directors, sometimes counselors, therapists, mental health professionals, but really just being willing to embrace reality and embrace the challenges and issues, and actually confront those things, I think is one of the key messages and key takeaways that I took away from our conversation today. So thank you again so much. It was great to be here with you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on the podcast. Really appreciate it, Nathan.
All right, gang, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope that it blessed you and gave you some insights and things to think about, wrestle with, and pray with that will help you to improve your mental health. And that we, especially those of you out there who are like me, you're young and in your marriage and you're raising children, that we can help to form this next generation to have that virtuous mean that we talked about, that virtuous middle of recognizing the importance of our spiritual life, of our diet, fitness, rest, exercise, but also recognizing that there's sometimes where you just need help, and it's okay to go see a therapist or a counselor that can help you to work with things. You want to find the right person. Obviously, it's great to share your faith with the counselor or therapist that you're going to go see, and have somebody that has that understanding of the Catholic perspective or Christian perspective of life, but also somebody who's going to give you the set, number of goals, and have a clear expectation of when you're kind of done with therapy and ready to move on. And so if you enjoyed today's episode, again, I invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Apple or Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you'd like more content, if you want to see the things that are inspiring me, the articles, the books, the podcasts, the videos, things that are forming me in my faith, forming me in my pursuit of personal greatness and excellence, I invite you to join us on Locals, seekingexcellence.locals.com. I'm building my online community there. You can join for free, or you can become a paid subscriber to help support the show for as little as $10 per month or $100 for the year to get access to all of the content, all of the things that we have. You'll find things on there like our examination of excellence, which helps you to take basically an assessment of where you at in your personal excellence journey, getting a feel for where you're at, helping you create some action steps and goals, and really seeing where you might be slipping up, and letting yourself settle for mediocrity or worse. And so I invite you there, where you'll be able to find these resources and many more things that will help you to pursue personal greatness for yourself. Thank you again for listening today. It's been a pleasure to be with you. I hope that you'll tune in again very soon. God bless you. And now it's time for you to go out there and be your best. I'll see you next time.